My name is Madison, and for 3 years, my parents were the silent architects of my professional ruin. I am 28 years old, and 10 minutes ago, I was a lead nurse practitioner with a flawless record. Now, I am a liability. My chief of medicine didn't offer a seat. He showed me a digital log of narcotics dispensations signed with my encrypted ID access codes only my father could have obtained by keylogging my home laptop. It wasn't just a forged paper report, it was a high tech breach of my professional credentials that left the hospital with no choice but immediate suspension. He just slid a forged report across the mahogany desk, claiming I'd been diverting narcotics for months. At the bottom was my father Michael's signature, the same heavy, foreman style script he used to sign my childhood report cards. As security stripped my badge and escorted me past my whispering colleagues, my phone buzzed. It was a Facebook notification. My mother, Amanda, had just posted a photo of a sunset with the caption, "Integrity is everything." It breaks a mother's heart when a child chooses the darkness, but we must pray for their lost soul. Welcome to Sibling Scars and Revenge. Have you ever felt like you're invisible in your own family? Please, share your story in the comments below. Just like right now, I'm out for a drive to find some peace of mind. What about you? Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I'd love to connect with you. I didn't cry when the elevator doors closed on my career. I didn't ask the security guard for mercy as he watched me walk toward the employee parking lot. My mind was already performing a forensic audit of my life. Anger wasn't a heat in my chest. It was a cold, clinical calculation. I had been a silent investor in my parents' version of a perfect family, and today they had initiated a hostile takeover. I drove toward Oak Haven, the gated community that smelled of freshly cut grass and inherited privilege. My parents always said Oak Haven was a fortress. I realize now it was a cage, and I was the bird they decided to clip. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the house I'd called home for 2 decades, I didn't see a welcoming porch light. I saw my life sitting on the curb in 3 heavy-duty black trash bags. I walked to the front door and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. The resistance was mechanical, a final no from the people who had birthed me. I stepped back, looking at the pristine granite facade. I remembered the day Michael made me sign the paperwork for my $165,000 medical school loan. He'd sat me down in his home office, the air thick with the smell of expensive tobacco, and told me that scholarships were for people who didn't have a family to catch them. He said he was investing the family savings into a portfolio for my future, and the loans were just a way for me to have skin in the game. I believed him then. I was 22 and full of a daughter's blind loyalty. I didn't realize that my debt was their capital. Under the guise of helping me manage my medical school paperwork, Michael had me sign a limited power of attorney years ago. He used it to change my primary contact address to a PO. Box I never knew existed, intercepting every credit alert and late payment notice before they could ever reach my inbox. Every time I'd made a payment over the last 3 years, I wasn't just paying back a bank, I was paying for the granite counters I was now locked out of. I walked back to the curb. I tore open one of the bags. My scrubs, my medical journals, and my old wooden stethoscope were shoved haphazardly between old towels. They hadn't even bothered to pack my graduation photos. I reached into my glove box and pulled out my wallet. The banking app on my phone was a graveyard of grayed out icons. Michael had used our old joint account, the one I'd used since residency, to drain my savings and alert the fraud department that I was unstable. He used the power of attorney to freeze my secondary cards, effectively ghosting my financial existence while I was mid-shift. $25. That was the total liquidity of a woman who had just spent 12 hours saving lives. I looked up at the second floor window. The curtain flickered. My mother, Amanda, was watching. She didn't wave. She didn't open the window to explain. She just adjusted the silk drapes and disappeared into the shadows of a house bought with my stolen future. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the door. I simply threw the bags into the trunk of my beat-up car, gripped my stethoscope, and drove toward the exit gate. My compassion for them had been a luxury they had officially overdrafted. As the iron gates of Oak Haven clicked shut behind me, I realized this wasn't a breakdown. It was an accounting. And by the time I was done, they would realize that the lost soul they were praying for was the only one who knew where all the bodies were buried. 7 days at the temporary shelter felt like a lifetime of clinical observation. The transition from the high thread count sheets of Oak Haven to a thin, plastic wrapped mattress in a converted warehouse was a shock to the system, but I treated it like a medical rotation. I learned to wash my hair in the stainless steel sink of a gas station on Route 30, using the hand dryer to mimic a salon blowout, while the cashier watched me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I was 28 years old, a valedictorian with a master's degree, and I was surviving on one lukewarm bowl of volunteer soup a day. The phone buzzed against the cold metal frame of bed 14 at 11 minutes past midnight. It was the first sign of life from the fortress. My father Michael's text was short and clinical. Apologize for your attitude and your ungrateful lifestyle, and maybe I'll reconsider. I might even tell the hospital board that the narcotics report was a data entry error. The door is still open, for now. I stared at the screen until the light burned my retinas. I didn't reply. I didn't ask why he would burn my world down, just to see if I'd crawl back to the ashes. I just sat there, in the dark, the fluorescent lights of the warehouse buzzing overhead like a swarm of insects. People often ask how someone with my credentials, someone trained to recognize symptoms and diagnose pathologies, could stay trapped in that domestic orbit for so long. They look at the blue notebook of my parents' sabotage and wonder why I didn't just walk away at 21. The truth is, Michael hadn't just built skyscrapers. He had spent 2 decades building an invisible cage around my psyche. This is the house of learned helplessness. It is a prison without iron bars, where the warden convinces you that the outside world is a predatory wasteland, and he is your only protector. Every time I reached for independence, Michael used gaslighting like a professional grade tool. He would tell me that my successes were just lucky breaks, and my mistakes were proof that I lacked the grit to survive without his guidance. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a permanent, high-functioning dependent he could use as a social credit score. I had spent years subsidizing their cruelty with my silence, but the account of my patience had finally hit zero. I wasn't their child. I was their silent investor, footing the bill for their version of a perfect family while they practiced normalized cruelty in the dark. I put the phone face down on the mattress. Anger wasn't a loud, crashing wave this time. It was a clinical, focused energy. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a hostile environment, and I was the only survivor who knew the layout of the building. I opened my notes app and started a spreadsheet of every obligation they had ever leveraged against me. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to audit them out of existence. Inside that dark warehouse, my phone glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet, methodical retribution. Amanda Johansson understood the architecture of a rumor better than any foreman understood a blueprint. As the president of the Oak Haven PTA for over a decade, she had refined the art of the concerned whisper until it was a professional-grade weapon. While I was waking up to the smell of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies in the shelter, my mother was holding court at the Oak Haven Country Club, performing the role of the heartbroken martyr. She didn't need to shout that I was a narcotics addict. She just had to tilt her head during a charity luncheon and sigh about how devastating it was to watch a brilliant daughter succumb to unstable choices. I attempted to find work, not as a nurse practitioner, that bridge had been cremated by my father's forged reports, but as anything that would pay for a meal. I drove 30 miles outside the gated sanctuary of Oak Haven to a high-end boutique in a neighboring town. The manager, a woman who had served on a regional board with my mother, smiled when I walked in, then let her gaze drop to my borrowed blouse. 5 minutes later, she returned from her office, her face set in that mask of Oak Haven, pity I knew so well. She told me the position was suddenly filled, but as I walked toward the exit, I heard her phone chime with a Facebook notification. My mother had just shared a post about protecting our community from the shadows within. Oak Haven had transformed from a community into a surveillance net. Every shop owner, every former family friend, and every clerk at the grocery store became an extension of my parents' reach. I was a forensic study in character assassination. When I tried to apply for a stocking job at a local pharmacy, the owner didn't even look at my resume. He simply said, "Your father Michael called? Madison. He's worried about your proximity to the medicine cabinets. We can't take that risk." I realized then that my parents didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted me back because an independent Madison was a variable they couldn't control. My mother's concern was a tactical strike, and my father's open door was a trapdoor. I sat on a park bench, 35 miles from the gates of Oak Haven, watching the sunset. I didn't feel the sting of rejection anymore. My emotions had been replaced by a cold, analytical clarity. This wasn't a family dynamic. It was a siege. They were trying to starve me into submission, using their social capital to ensure I remained a worthless burden in the eyes of the world. I took out my old stethoscope and gripped the cold metal. It was the only piece of my identity they hadn't been able to trash. I realized that their power was a subscription I was no longer willing to fund. They weren't shocked by the darkness they claimed I'd chosen. They were shocked that I had stopped playing my part in their perfect script. I went back to my notes app. The list of their crimes was growing, and I was beginning to see the patterns they thought they had hidden. Every phone call Amanda made, every warning Michael issued, it was all being logged into a balance sheet that was nearly ready to be settled. The woman didn't look like a volunteer, and she certainly didn't look like a social worker. She wore a plain navy jacket with a sharp, tailored cut and carried a brown leather briefcase that looked older than I was. I was sitting on my plastic-wrapped mattress when she stopped at the foot of bed 14. She didn't offer a sympathetic smile or a religious pamphlet. She just looked at me with a steady, clinical gaze and said the 7 words that stopped the hum of the baseboard heater in my brain. Your grandma hired me to find you. My grandmother, Catherine, had been dead for 5 years. She was the only librarian in Oak Haven who could silence my father, Michael, with a single look, a woman who treated honesty like a religious obligation. I had spent months thinking I was alone in this trench. But as the woman sat on the folding chair next to me, I realized I had been under a protective canopy I didn't even know existed. Her name was Ruth Kalin, a licensed private investigator. Ruth set the briefcase on the sagging mattress between us. On the leather, in faded black ink, were 5 words in a handwriting I would know anywhere. For Madison. When she's ready. Ruth explained that Catherine had hired her 10 years ago, when I was only 18. She hadn't been stalking them with a camera. That would be illegal. Instead, Ruth performed periodic forensic monitoring of their public filings, tax liens, and corporate registrations. My grandmother knew Michael's ego would eventually lead to financial recklessness, and she wanted a paper trail waiting for me when the house of cards finally collapsed. My grandmother had been married to a man like Michael for 30 years, and she knew the architecture of his pathology better than anyone. She knew that his need for control wouldn't just fade, it would eventually target me. She paid a retainer upfront for a decade of periodic surveillance on my parents. For 10 years, Ruth had been the silent witness to the Johansson household. As she opened the briefcase, she didn't just show me papers. She showed me the forensic evidence of my parents' souls. Inside was a thick manila folder containing 37 separate recordings of my mother Amanda's phone calls. I listened to the playback of her voice, smooth as silk, identifying herself as a concerned neighbor to hospital boards and a social worker to the shelter. Ruth had copies of every fabricated document Michael had created, the narcotics reports, the fake police complaints, and the metadata linking every anonymous email to the Johansson household IP address. Catherine had planned for this nearly to the year. She had watched the walls close in on me from the grave, making sure I wouldn't be trapped forever. At the bottom of the briefcase was a large yellow envelope sealed with a wax stamp from a law office in Savannah. My grandmother had sold her estate years ago, but she hadn't spent the money. She had placed the proceeds into a trust managed by a fiduciary, and because of conservative management over a decade, the balance was now $680,000. The sole beneficiary was me. Michael and Amanda had no knowledge of his existence because Catherine knew that if Michael found out, he would find a way to liquidate it before I ever saw a cent. I looked at the trust summary, then at my $25 liquidity in my wallet. Catherine's letter, tucked inside the file, was clear. Don't use this for revenge. Use it for freedom. I sat there as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, no longer a blacklisted nurse or a shelter resident. I was the sovereign of a $680,000 war chest and 10 years of documented betrayal. My hands weren't shaking from fear anymore. They were steady with the weight of the ammunition I now held. This wasn't a family dispute. It was a professional litigation, and I finally had the retainer to hire the best executioner in the state. I walked into Ellen Briggs' office 48 hours after receiving Catherine's briefcase. Ellen was 64, with hair the color of industrial steel and a reputation for being the most lethal litigator in the county. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She just pointed at a stack of folders on her desk and said, "Madison, your grandmother didn't just leave you a trust fund. She left you a forensic roadmap to your parents' prison cells." For the next 4 hours, we performed a postmortem on my family's finances. Anger wasn't a heat in my chest. It was a cold, clinical calculation as we reviewed the mirror notebook. This was the ledger where my father, Michael, and my mother, Amanda, recorded the reality they hid from the world. It revealed that while I was washing my hair in gas station sinks and counting my last $25, my parents were running a highly profitable embezzlement scheme. They had used my name and forged my medical credentials to secure a series of high-interest loans against our family land that had been promised to me in my grandfather's will. The total amount they had siphoned off was $1,500,000, but the greed didn't stop at embezzlement. Ellen slid a series of tax filings across the desk. "This is the kill shot," she said. "For the past 3 years, including the 8 months I spent in the Oak Haven Community Shelter, Michael and Amanda had been claiming a massive caregiver tax credit. They hadn't just claimed me as a dependent. They filed fraudulent paperwork with the state, declaring me an incapacitated adult during my brief stay at the shelter. They used their grieving parents' persona to collect caregiver subsidies and tax credits, effectively telling the government I was a mental invalid while I was actually saving lives in a clinic 2 towns away." I looked at the signatures. Michael's heavy Foreman script and Amanda's neat PTA cursive were right there, certifying to the government that I was a helpless invalid while they were actively making me homeless. They weren't just sabotaging my career, they were using my suffering as a tax-deductible revenue stream. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now I was the one holding the collection notice. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only a sharp, crystalline clarity. This wasn't a family breakdown, it was an audit, and the balance sheet was finally in my hands. "What do you want to do?" Ellen asked, her pen hovering over a formal complaint form. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask if we could give them a chance to explain. I just looked at the ledger of their crimes and said, "File the lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference, and then contact the authorities about the tax fraud and the embezzlement. I want them to see exactly how much their concerned parents' act is going to cost them." I stood up, leaving the smell of expensive tobacco and PTA perfume behind me in those files. I wasn't the lost soul they were praying for on Facebook. I was the auditor who had just arrived to reclaim my stolen future, and I wasn't leaving until every cent was accounted for. The conference room at Ellen's office smelled of expensive leather and the kind of desperation that even gardenia perfume couldn't mask. My father, Michael, didn't enter the room. He invaded it, his Foreman-style confidence still intact as he sat across from me. Amanda sat beside him, clutching her designer handbag, her face set in that practiced martyr expression she used for community luncheons. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if I were a rebellious intern instead of the woman who had just filed a lawsuit against them. "Madison, enough of this performance," Michael began, his voice booming with a false authority. "We're here to be reasonable. We'll drop the malfeasance claims and let you come back to Oak Haven if you drop this frivolous litigation. Think of the family's reputation." I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence stretch until Michael shifted in his seat. Then, I slid a heavy audit report across the mahogany table. "Reputation is a rented asset, Dad," I said, my tone clinical. "And your lease just expired." I watched the color drain from Amanda's face as she looked at the first page. It was the forensic audit of the $1,500,000 loan they had secured using my forged medical credentials. The report detailed exactly how they had defaulted on that loan after siphoning the money into Michael's failing construction business. But I wasn't finished. "Oak Haven went into foreclosure 3 weeks ago," I said, the words falling like iron weights. "This didn't happen overnight, Dad. You stopped paying the mortgage 18 months ago, hiding the bank's notices in that secret P.O. box while you funneled the cash into your failing business. I didn't just stumble upon the sale. I've been tracking the auction date since the day you threw my bags on the curb. The bank didn't care about your status at the country club when you stopped making payments on the home equity line you stole from me. Michael tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, but I held up a hand. I didn't just find out about the foreclosure, I continued. I participated in it. I used my grandmother's trust fund to buy the house from the bank's liquidation list. I slid a second document toward them, a certified eviction notice. You aren't the owners anymore. You're just tenants who have overstayed their welcome. You have 30 days to remove your things from my house. I sat back, watching them realize that their power had always been an illusion. In the world of forensic accounting, we call this the empty wallet paradox, the moment a predator realizes that their entire lifestyle was built on the credit of the person they tried to destroy. For years, Michael and Amanda built their authority on a foundation of stolen capital and borrowed prestige. They confused having wealth with being leaders. Without my stolen future to fund their granite counters and PTA parties, they had no inner foundation to stand on. Their identity was a subscription with me footing the bill, and I had finally hit cancel. Please, Madison, Amanda whispered, her eyes finally filling with real, unchoreographed tears. Where will we go? I didn't summon regret. I summoned the memory of washing my hair in a gas station sink. I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice as cold as the Oakhaven gates. But I'm sure you can find somewhere with a roof, food, and family. Isn't that all a person needs? Justice didn't look like a prison cell for Michael and Amanda. It looked like a small unit in a trailer park, 20 minutes away from the Oakhaven gates they once guarded. I heard through the town's shifting gossip that Michael still tells his new neighbors he was betrayed by an ungrateful daughter, but the truth is now a public record that no amount of pride can overwrite. I used my grandmother Catherine's trust to clear my name and established the Oakhaven Community Wellness Clinic in a commercial plaza just outside the residential gates. I bypassed the restrictive HOA rules by purchasing a medical suite where I can actually serve the public, not just the elite. It isn't a facility for the elite. It's a sanctuary for the people the system and families like mine chose to leave behind. My stethoscope is no longer a symbol of my parents' expectations. It's the key to a life I finally own. I've come to realize that for some, control is the only way they know how to love. But if you find yourself sitting in a space that doesn't feel like yours, wondering if wanting independence makes you selfish, listen to me. Wanting freedom is not betrayal. It is survival. You are worth every penny it costs to be free. If this story validated your pain or reminded you that justice is possible, please share it. Let others know they aren't alone. Subscribe to our community for more journeys of reclaiming the truth. I'll see you in the next one.